Hello, Covenant family. Pastor John here to introduce our psalm for this week. Again, one of the songs of ascent, Psalm 124, a psalm of David. Let's read the psalm together and then we'll discuss it. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when people rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. The torrent would have gone over us. Then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed is the Lord who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Now, one of the things that we notice in this psalm, and one of the things that we're going to be discussing on Sunday, is in this psalm, David acts as, in the Hebrew, a hazan, or what we would call in English a cantor, one who sings forth a song or a prayer as we sing our hymns and psalms and spiritual songs. They are, in fact, sung prayers. As David sings forth, he is leading us, and we see this right at the beginning of this psalm. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, or it's as if he is saying, the Lord, he is the one on our side. Now everybody, I want you to join in with me. Let's sing this together. And then he repeats, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side. In the Hebrew, which doesn't convey well in English, because Hebrew is a very terse language. In other words, it takes one word in Hebrew to equal, or perhaps it'd be the reverse of that, it takes several words in English to equal one word in Hebrew. In the Hebrew, notably in Hebrew poetry, in the Psalms, oftentimes the psalmist will lay words or a series of words, typically 2 or 3 Hebrew words, against another 2 or 3 Hebrew words in parallel. And they'll often do this as a way of amplifying or comparing or contrasting. In English, we will typically use rhyme and meter to create this kind of contrast or to convey the message, which is one of the reasons why our psalters are just brilliant translations of the Psalms. But in this case, in the original Hebrew, David lays out 2 or 3 Hebrew words against 2 or 3 Hebrew words to create a contrast. And in the English translation, we see this here where it says, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, that's one side. In fact, in verse 2, in the original Hebrew, we see this parallel. It's very clear. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, that's here. When the people rose up against us, that's here. It is as if David is saying, those who are against us are pitted against the Lord. Not against us. They're pitted against the Lord. He's the one that's on our side. That's quite a contrast, isn't it? To say those who are against us are against the Lord and vice versa. But that's how David is laying out this structure. The translators, and it's also in the Hebrew as well, the translators clearly create what's called a conditional statement, an if-then clause. And in the Hebrew, there is if and there is then. And David is, so to speak, he's laying out a logical argument. If the Lord is on our side, then what? Well, if the Lord is on our side, or if he had not been on our side, because he states it in the negative, well, we would have had problems with these people who were angry. Their anger was kindled against us. Or we would have had problems with these flood waters, which we may assume he's using figuratively there. We would have drowned, so to speak, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side. And so the general idea that David is conveying here is that we are delivered from destruction because the Lord is on our side. Then he goes on to say, Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. Again, describing the idea of this deliverance. We have escaped from we have escaped like a bird, so he's employing simile here, from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. And we might think of this as the bird cage, so to speak, that we were encaged in our fear, perhaps, what we are concerned about, what people will do to us, what will men do to us. And the Lord has delivered us. We are able to flee from our fear, so to speak. We are able to be released from the bird cage of this trauma. Why? Well, again, David's leading us in this song, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side. But in fact, the Lord is on our side, which is evidenced by His defeat of our enemies and our freedom from the fear of this bird cage, so to speak. And then finally, David concludes, our help is in the name of the Lord, using the covenant name of God here. Lord is in this case is the translation of the Hebrew word Yahweh, which is the covenant name of God that is conveying God's covenant love for His people. Our help is in the name of the Lord, or the sovereign God who loves us, who made heaven and earth, which is a repetition from some of the other Psalms that we have looked at. But the general idea is that He is our Lord. He is our God, and He's not any God, little g, fake gods of the pagan world, but He is the God who made heaven and earth. And He is the one who is on our side. He is the one who has delivered us. He is the one in whom we are freed. He is the one in whom we trust. Well, this is a beautiful psalm and an encouragement, and we see the gospel within this, for we have indeed been freed from destruction. We have been freed from our enemies of sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ, which we will look at in much greater depth on this coming Sunday. I hope that you will join us as we look at Psalm 124, and may God bless you as you continue to memorize and meditate upon and study His Word.